welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and roll your notifications to all so you don't miss any of the demonic content. For those who don't know Frank Peretti, he's the author of several books, most notably This Present Darkness in 1986 and Piercing the Darkness in 1989. While the sales of This Present Darkness were anemic at first, Christian singer Amy Grant recommended the work to audience members on her 1987 tour. Afterwards, sales exploded, and both of the books have sold a combined total of somewhere over 3.5 million copies. Before turning to writing novels, Peretti was a minister in the Assemblies of God. The focus of Peretti's novels, or at least the ones I'm concerned with here, are the supernatural, specifically the warfare between demons and angels, and the hands which humans play in these battles. The works also straddle the boundaries of fact and fiction. Like individuals reading a historical novel might, many evangelicals see the specifics of Peretti's novel as fiction, while the setting is true. Now, I'm relatively new to Peretti's work, so I'm going to give you my kind of first impressions, and then I'm going to turn to someone who's written on this subject, Dr. Peter Gardella. For my part, I would classify these novels as part of the anti-spiritualist movement, since they isolate New Age elements as being the source of an encroaching demonic presence in the world. For instance, in This Present Darkness, the Universal Consciousness Society, a kind of generalized New Age group, is the religious front for Satan, while an underwriting company, Omnicorp, handles political and financial aspects for the so-called man downstairs. We have demons called things like divination and sorcery, which seems weird and out of place compared to the other demons, like spirits of harassment or demons of despair, unless we contextualize their presence as being a critique of spiritualism. The work is also incredibly problematic from a gendered and intellectual angle. The women of the narrative are almost one and all described according to their attractiveness and physical appearance. The main characters are male, while the major antagonist, a psychology professor, willingly serves the devil. And there are frequent jabs at intellectual pursuits, higher education, and their futility throughout. There's also a persistent theme in which women accuse men of sexual abuse and turn out later to have been influenced by demons. I hope we don't need to discuss why correlating these would be problematic. The book is also significantly influenced by ideas of spiritual warfare. In fact, we could almost typify this as a kind of spiritual warfare novel. We can think of the book as a kind of visualization of Harper's work, whereas we are told in Harper's work that demons are constantly assaulting Christians. In Peretti's work, we get to see demons clinging to people, forcing their gaits to slow, influencing their actions, and whispering thoughts to them. It provides a kind of visceral reinforcement to ideas of spiritual warfare. When you're praying, this is what's actually happening, even if it seems like nothing actually is. And as Peter Gardella points out in Spiritual Warfare in the Fiction of Frank Peretti, the appeal to entities like Rafar of Babylon and implications of spiritual topography in cities feed into the spiritual mapping movement of third-wave Christians, which I've previously discussed in the context of the NAR. From here, I'm going to transition more completely to Gardella's work on the subject. If you haven't read Gardella's work, I'd recommend picking up American Civil Religion, What Americans Hold Sacred, and American Angels, Useful Spirits in the Material World. While the entire article I mentioned above is great, there are three key insights that I'd like to share with you here. First, Peretti's work rises at a time when a more magical worldview, which gives birth to popular properties like Star Wars, Magic the Gathering, and Dungeons & Dragons, begins to spread across the intellectual landscape of the United States. Gardella points out that these, quote, novels of spiritual warfare gave evangelicals a way to enjoy special powers while remaining within the Christian tradition. That is, it allows people to inhabit a role other than the one they frequently do on a day-to-day basis, one which is enchanted and important. The power of this kind of opportunity is not something to overlook and likely explains a significant part of the novel's draw. Second, it's worth noting that, quote, the last 3 decades of the 20th century witnessed more violence and more wars inspired by religion than any period since that of the Reformers and Puritans. From the Yom Kippur War of 1973 to the Iranian Revolution to the civil war between Buddhists and Hindus in Sri Lanka to Waco and the Oklahoma City bombings, both abroad and at home, Americans needed a way to contextualize the mounting religious tension they saw in the world. Peretti likely gave them a way to do so through his writings. Finally, and most importantly, Gardella points out that the work is steeped in Peretti's own notion of the good life, one of rural bucolic simplicity. In an interview with Bob and Gretchen Pasatino, Peretti claimed that Christians should, quote, live a quiet life, mind our own business, work with our hands, and walk properly towards those outside, end quote. This idea of simplicity is reflected in the journey of many of the main characters, but perhaps most clearly in the home of the former dean of Whitmore College. Quote, a quaint and unpretentious 10-acre farm which contains, quote, fruit trees pruned and bearing, the flower beds soft with fleshly turned and weeded soil. We have chickens pecking, dogs barking, and when our main characters see this simple splendor, he expresses pleasure over the fact that he finally gets to interview, quote, a normal human being, end quote. While it might seem strange for a novel to have such reach, Peretti's work goes on to significantly influence the religious imaginary of evangelical Christians, the conspiratorial demonology shared across the Third Wave, and organizations and movements influenced by them. If you're interested in researching this topic further, I'm going to leave some recommendations for additional resources in the description below.